So far, we have talked about residential mortgage-backed securities, which are based on residential mortgages. Now we move to the world of commercial mortgage-backed securities. These are securities backed by a pool of commercial mortgage loans on income-producing property. In alternative investments, we spend a lot of time discussing income-producing property and how to evaluate such property. In simple terms, properties such as office buildings or retail plazas would be examples of commercial income-producing properties. Generally, commercial mortgage loans are non-recourse loans. Hence, credit analysis involves studying the cash flow from the underlying properties. This is an important point. Let's say that Mr. Smith is an office building developer. He takes out a commercial mortgage loan and uses that loan to construct this office building. Mr. Smith also happens to be extremely rich with lots of other properties. The point now is this: when the bank issues the commercial mortgage loan, and let's say that commercial loan becomes part of a pool that is used to issue commercial mortgage-backed securities, and for some reason Mr. Smith defaults over here, then non-recourse means that the bank can only go after this particular office building. It cannot go after the other properties or the other assets that might belong to Mr. Smith. So we've talked about the concept of non-recourse before. Here it's important because generally commercial loans are non-recourse. It's also important because when we are doing a credit analysis of mortgage-backed securities, it's extremely important to understand the quality of the collateral. So if this is the collateral, the pool consists of commercial mortgage loans, we need to do a thorough analysis of this pool. And the credit analysis here will require us to do a credit analysis of the cash flows associated with the office building or the other commercial properties. When performing a credit analysis of a commercial income-producing property, there are two key indicators that we need to be concerned about. One is debt to service coverage ratio, and the other is the loan to value ratio. We have talked about the loan to value ratio before. This simply is equal to the amount of loan that has been taken out. For example, if the loan is 1 million and the value of the underlying property is 1.5 million, then that is our loan to value ratio, which is 2/3 or 0.67. Obviously, if the loan to value ratio is high, that means that the credit risk is relatively high. A low loan to value ratio would be safer. The other important ratio is the debt to service coverage ratio, and this basically is the net operating income divided by the debt service amount for every year. Obviously, the numerator and denominator both represent cash flows of sorts, and they need to be for a particular period. So we can say this is the net operating income for a given year divided by the debt service, which is the total payments that need to be made in a given year, both interest and principal payments. Now, how can you remember this ratio? From FRA, I'm sure you remember the basic formula for interest coverage. Interest coverage is operating income divided by the interest expense. Notice the parallel over here. Instead of taking operating income, we are taking net operating income, and in alternative investments we learn how to calculate the net operating income for a commercial property. But here you just need to remember that we are taking the net operating income. In the interest coverage formula, we are simply dividing by interest expense. Here we need to be concerned with the total amount of payment that is being made, since the underlying loans are really mortgages. They are amortizing loans, so interest payments and principal payments are being made. We need to consider the total payment. Here it is easy to see that we'll be more comfortable with a relatively high net operating income compared to debt service. A benchmark number would be 1. A ratio of 1 means that the net operating income covers the debt service. Anything greater than 1 will make us feel relatively safer. So a high debt service coverage ratio means that the credit risk is low. Higher the better. Something before 1 would be a cause for concern, because that would imply that the net operating income is not enough to cover the debt service cost. A credit rating agency determines the level of credit enhancement necessary to achieve a desired credit rating. For example, if specific debt service coverage and loan to value ratios are needed and those ratios cannot be met at the loan level, subordination is used to achieve the desired rating. This point is fairly straightforward. Let's say that we come up with the debt service coverage ratio and the loan to value ratio, and based on these ratios the credit risk is relatively high. Let's say that this might correspond to a credit rating of B, but for some reason the entity that is issuing these securities wants a higher credit rating. So how can that be done? One way is to structure the transaction such that we have multiple tranches where the junior tranches absorb more risk, these absorb the losses, and the senior tranches then get protection. So we've talked about this earlier. This is one way of doing credit enhancement. This particular example is one of internal credit. This particular example is one of an internal credit enhancement. Losses arising from loan defaults are charged against the principal balance of the lowest priority commercial mortgage-backed security tranche outstanding. Losses arising from loan defaults are charged against the principal balance of the lowest priority CMBS tranche outstanding. This tranche may not be rated by credit rating agencies. In this case, this unrated tranche is called the first loss piece, residual tranche, or equity tranche. Now, the point here also is quite straightforward. If we have multiple tranches, as I described earlier, and let's say that this is the most subordinated tranche, it's called the first loss piece because if there are any realized losses, this is the tranche that will have to bear those losses. It's also called a residual tranche or an equity tranche because any committed fixed payments are first made to the more senior tranches, and whatever is left then goes to the equity tranche. So since whatever is left goes here, it's also called the residual tranche. This is being treated the way equity is treated, where regular debt holders are paid off first and what is left is for the equity holders. Commercial mortgage-backed securities have considerable call protection. Because of this, CMBSs trade more like corporate bonds than like residential mortgage-backed securities. With residential mortgage-backed securities, there generally is no call protection. Here, I want to make a larger point. In case you've not realized this, there is a lot of similarity between a call option or a call provision and the prepayment option. If you think about the prepayment option, homeowners who have the option to prepay will exercise that option when it makes sense for them to prepay. When homeowners make prepayments, ultimately the holders of mortgage-backed securities get their money back faster and the bonds are retired sooner. That's what happens with the call option. With the call option, the issuer has the option to pay off the bond and essentially retire the bond. So conceptually, the call option and prepayment option is similar. The next point is, what is the mechanism that enables commercial mortgage-backed securities to have call protection? Call protection comes in two forms, at the structure level and at the loan level. The structure level protection comes through sequential pay tranches, and we've talked about this before. If we have sequential pay tranches, then this can be set up such that certain tranches are paid off sooner and other tranches are paid off later. It is the tranches that are paid off later that we are referring to over here. Call protection can also happen at the loan level, and there are four mechanisms that you need to be aware of. I want you to remember these four: prepayment lockouts, prepayment penalty points, yield maintenance charges, and defeasance. You also need to just know one or two lines about each of these. When we talk about prepayment lockouts, this is simply a contractual agreement that prohibits any prepayments during a specific lockout period. Prepayment penalty points simply says that if prepayments happen, there is a certain penalty associated with that, which is measured in terms of points, and the points correspond to a certain percentage. Yield maintenance charges are a similar concept. They are also called make-whole charge. This is a penalty paid by the borrower that makes refinancing solely to get a lower mortgage rate uneconomical for the borrower. What's happening here is that the borrower is being discouraged to refinance because of lower interest rates. And finally, defeasance involves the borrower providing funds for the servicer to invest in a portfolio of government securities that replicates the cash flows that would exist in the absence of prepayments. Next point. Many commercial loans backing commercial mortgage-backed securities transactions are balloon loans. A balloon loan is one where the entire principal amount is due at the end. The risk that a borrower will not be able to make the balloon payment, again this is the payment at the end of the loan period, because either the borrower cannot arrange for refinancing or cannot sell the property to generate sufficient funds to pay off the balloon balance, is called balloon risk. So the borrower needs to pay a ton of money over here. The risk obviously is that the borrower might not be able to generate that money, in which case the borrower will have to pay back later. The risk of this happening is called balloon risk, and this is a type of extension risk because it extends the life of the loan. The investor then faces the risk of getting money back later than expected.